It was just after sunrise when I stepped onto my porch, coffee in hand, ready to start the day like any other. But something was different. The birds were quieter, almost reverent, as if nature itself had paused to take in what I'd done. And there it was, my front lawn, glowing like a radioactive flamingo, drenched in a shade of neon pink so loud it looked like Barbie's dream house had exploded across the grass. The morning light only made it worse. Better, actually, casting long pink shadows over the driveway and sidewalk, like cotton candy creeping across concrete. A jogger passing by slowed to a stop, stared, then pulled out their phone and started filming. Across the street, Mrs. Phillips dropped her gardening gloves in disbelief, while two of the Patel kids pointed and whispered with wide, gleeful eyes. I just stood there, sipping slowly, taking it all in with the kind of calm that only comes after weeks of silent suffering and passive-aggressive notes. The truth is, this wasn't some random act of madness. No, this was tactical. This was premeditated. This was a message. You see, the lawn hadn't always been this vibrant shade of petty revenge. It used to be just average, patchy in places, a little dry in others, but still very much mine. That is, until Karen got involved. Karen with her clipboard, her weekly HOA reminders, and her pathological need for control. She'd been circling my house like a vulture in pastel slacks for months, picking apart every blade of grass, every weed, every inch that didn't conform to her manicured vision of suburban paradise. But this morning, I had finally spoken back. Not with words, with paint. Neon, pink, paint. The first time Karen complained about my lawn, it almost felt like a parody of itself. She showed up at my door at exactly 9 a.m. on a Saturday, the kind of precision that screams either military background or someone with far too much time on their hands. She was dressed in her usual HOA regalia, polo shirt tucked into khaki capris, clipboard in hand like it was a sheriff's badge, and that smile. That tight, syrupy grin that made it clear she didn't come to chat. She came to correct. "Hi there, neighbor," she chirped, eyes already scanning my lawn, as if the grass might grow an inch taller while she spoke. "Just a quick heads up. We've been noticing some inconsistencies in lawn maintenance around the neighborhood, and your yard came up in discussion." Inconsistencies. That was the word she used, like my Bermuda grass had committed a crime against suburban harmony. I blinked, trying to keep the sarcasm from boiling over, and said, "What kind of inconsistencies are we talking about?" "Well," she began, flipping through her papers like she was about to show me legal evidence. "Your grass has some uneven coloration, patchy brown spots, some aggressive crabgrass along the sidewalk. And it's been, let's see," she paused for dramatic effect, 11 days since the last mow. I looked out at my yard. Was it perfect? Number. But it was a lawn. A real living lawn that wasn't painted, paved, or artificially enhanced, like Karen's own AstroTurf masterpiece 3 doors down. I opened my mouth to explain that I'd been traveling for work and planned to mow that afternoon. But she cut me off with a smile sharp enough to slice through topsoil. "No worries," she said, her voice like a poisoned cupcake. "I'm just here to help. We all want the neighborhood to look its best. I actually brought a pamphlet." She handed me a glossy printout titled Lawn Harmony, Guidelines for a Beautiful Community. I didn't take it. She laid it on my welcome mat anyway. Then, with the air of someone who'd just completed a holy task, she turned and marched back to her house without waiting for a reply. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about grass. It was about control, about power, about a woman who saw her title as HOA president not as a service but as a throne. And my lawn? Apparently it was the battlefield. 3 days after Karen's surprise Saturday sermon on lawn aesthetics, I found a crisp white envelope tucked neatly into my mailbox. No stamp, no postmark, just my name written in block letters and the unmistakable HOA logo, printed at the top left corner. I already knew what it was before I opened it. The paper practically radiated self-importance. I tore it open on the spot and skimmed the contents, heart beating just a little faster than I cared to admit. There it was, in bold type. Notice of violation. Failure to maintain lawn in accordance with HOA standards. Beneath it, a list of infractions. Brown patches. Overgrowth near the sidewalk. Non-uniform turf density. And, my personal favorite, aesthetic discordance. It sounded less like a lawn critique and more like I'd dressed my yard in clashing plaid. The letter ended with a formal warning and a fine of $75. $75 for grass. Dead grass. I stood there in the driveway, envelope flapping in the wind, rereading the words like they might somehow make more sense the second time around. But they didn't. What made it worse was the part that said, failure to comply may result in additional penalties, including forced compliance landscaping at the homeowner's expense. That night, I took the letter to the monthly HOA meeting, held, unsurprisingly, in the community clubhouse that Karen had decorated like a country club knockoff. She sat at the head of the table like it was her private boardroom, sipping flavored water through a glass straw. When I raised my hand to speak, she gave me a nod that was more dismissive than polite. I explained the situation calmly, even showed photos of my lawn, and compared them to other homes that looked equally natural. Karen leaned back, hands folded over her clipboard, and said, "Well, we can't enforce everything equally. We focus on properties that are most visible to visitors. Yours happens to be near the entrance." Translation. Mine was the first thing people saw, and Karen didn't like what it said about her reign. The other board members didn't offer much, just nervous glances and a few mumbled, "We're just trying to follow protocol" excuses. One guy even apologized under his breath before staring at the table, like he hoped it would swallow him whole. I left that meeting without resolution, without support, and $75 poorer. But I also left with something else. Determination. By the time the second warning letter arrived, this one citing continued disregard for community harmony, I knew I needed proof. It wasn't enough to say Karen was harassing me. I needed cold, hard evidence that she was more than just a concerned neighbor with a god complex. So I did what any sensible person under siege by a lawn dictator would do. I set up surveillance. It wasn't anything fancy. Just a discreet little outdoor camera tucked behind the porch light, angled perfectly to capture the front yard, the sidewalk, and most importantly, the edge of the grass Karen seemed to have adopted as her personal responsibility. At first, I wasn't sure what I expected to find. Maybe a few neighborhood dogs lifting a leg. Maybe a teenager cutting through to save a few seconds on their walk. But what I captured instead was far more interesting. The first recording came just 2 days after I installed the camera. It was early morning, sun barely up, street empty. And there she was, Karen, clad in a floral windbreaker and oversized sunglasses, like a suburban spy who thought she was blending in. She crept across the street holding something in her gloved hand. I leaned in, watching the footage as she stooped down and sprinkled what looked like lawn dye on a patch of brown grass near my driveway. I rewound, squinted, confirmed. She was literally dyeing my grass without permission. It got better, or worse, depending on your perspective. 2 days later, I caught her returning with a pamphlet in hand and taping it to my mailbox, not leaving it inside, not slipping it into the slot, taping it, on the outside, like I was a delinquent in need of public shaming. The title read, "Grass Shame, What Your Lawn Says About You." I didn't even open it. I just tossed it in the trash and added another minute of footage to the growing folder I labeled Karen Files. But the real kicker came a week later. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was inside folding laundry when I got a motion alert from the camera. I checked the live feed and saw Karen dragging what appeared to be a sample patch of synthetic turf across the sidewalk and placing it on my lawn. Not permanently, just resting it there like a visual suggestion, like some kind of passive-aggressive vision board for the perfect front yard. She stood back, hands on her hips, smiling as if she had improved my property by force of will alone. I couldn't believe it. She wasn't just filing complaints. She was actively manipulating my yard like it was her own sandbox. My property had become her pet project, and she didn't even have the courtesy to ask. So I downloaded the videos, saved backups to the cloud, and even emailed a copy to myself, just in case. If Karen wanted a war over grass, then I'd bring the receipts. I wouldn't just fight back with words or angry emails. I'd fight with footage, with facts, with time-stamped proof of her HOA tyranny. Because while she played queen of the cul-de-sac, I was building my case. And soon, very soon, I'd be ready to strike. After watching Karen plant synthetic turf samples on my lawn like she was staging a makeover show, I realized something had to change. Words weren't working. HOA meetings were useless. Even video footage, while satisfying, wasn't stopping her from treating my property like her personal project. So I decided to send a message. A very visible, very stubborn message. It started with a sign. Bold black letters on a bright yellow background. Private property. Do not alter, paint, or plant anything without permission. I even laminated it, just for that extra Karen-proof touch. I staked it dead center in the lawn where no one could miss it, not even her tunnel vision. Then I waited. Less than 24 hours later, it was gone. Not knocked over by the wind, not chewed by a dog. Gone. And in its place, a quaint little wooden plaque that read, "Future site of community garden. Green dreams start here." With a tiny HOA logo burned into the corner. Burned, not stamped. Someone had taken the time to carve it. I could practically smell the smug. I stormed to my camera footage and sure enough, there she was. Karen, midnight. Hoodie pulled up like she thought it made her invisible, gardening gloves on, replacing my sign with hers like she was planting tulips. She even brought a small flashlight and looked both ways before hammering the stake into the ground. If I hadn't been so angry, I might have been impressed by her commitment to trespassing. That's when I cracked. The next morning, I stood in the middle of my lawn, hands on my hips, staring at that stupid wooden plaque. I didn't just want to take it down. I wanted to erase the whole idea of it. Make sure she, and everyone else, knew this wasn't just another house she could micromanage. That's when the idea hit me. Paint. But not just any paint. I went online, researched safe turf colorants, and found exactly what I needed. Eco-friendly, biodegradable, water-based lawn dye. Meant for athletic fields, pet-friendly, and formulated to cling to even the most stubborn dry patches. And it came in custom colors. I clicked custom order, selected neon pink, and paid extra for express shipping. When the box arrived, it was like Christmas morning. I hauled it into the garage, cracked it open, and revealed the gallon jugs of blazing pink like I was unearthing treasure. That evening, just before sunset, I fired up my sprayer, loaded it with the dye, and got to work. Every stroke was therapeutic. Every line of pink across my lawn felt like reclaiming territory from an invading empire. By the time I was done, the entire front yard looked like it had been doused in melted highlighters. The kind of pink you could see from space. The kind of pink Karen couldn't unsee. Then I staked my sign back in the center, laminated, of course, only this time with a new message. Your move, Karen. And I went to bed with a smile. The next morning, the neighborhood was unusually quiet. No leaf blowers, no dog walkers, not even the familiar hum of Karen's electric car gliding by on her routine patrol. I stood at the window, coffee in hand, admiring my masterpiece. The neon pink lawn that looked like a cotton candy storm had touched down overnight. It was blindingly bright, unapologetically garish, and utterly perfect. The birds still landed on it, confused but unbothered. A few neighbors walked by with lingering stares and poorly hidden grins. One guy even gave me a thumbs up. I didn't need words. The color spoke for itself. But I knew Karen, and Karen wasn't going to accept defeat. She wasn't going to roll over because my lawn had become a Pepto-Bismol tribute to defiance. If anything, she'd double down. She'd find some obscure rule, call another meeting, maybe even file an official complaint about visual pollution. That's why I couldn't stop with paint. I needed more than a message. I needed a spectacle, a deterrent, a permanent reminder that this turf war wasn't hers to win. So I called Mitch. Mitch was the kind of friend who said yes first and asked questions later. We'd met in college during a group project involving solar energy and unconventional engineering challenges. While I went into boring corporate work, Mitch kept building wild machines, automated greenhouses, solar-powered water cannons, even a drone that could deliver tacos. He owed me a favor from a Vegas trip we don't talk about, so when I pitched my idea, he didn't hesitate. "What kind of crazy are we talking?" he asked. "The harmless but unforgettable kind," I said. "Give me details." "I want a remote-activated sprinkler system, but not just water. I want it to spray cinnamon-scented biodegradable soap. Full blast, 30-degree spread. Enough pressure to soak someone standing within 10 feet. There was a pause. Then, "This is the greatest call I've received in 6 months. I'm in." By the weekend, Mitch pulled into my driveway in his dusty pickup, tools rattling in the back like a war drum. We spent hours mapping the roof, measuring water pressure, and designing the perfect disguise. The tubing would run just beneath the edge of my solar panels, camouflaged with faux gutter guards. The reservoir would sit inside a hollowed-out garden box behind the house, invisible to even the nosiest of neighbors. Mitch even installed a manual switch and a remote control, just in case I wanted to savor the exact moment. We didn't stop there. He added motion sensors, tiny, nearly invisible, and wired them to detect movement within a specific radius. That way, even if I wasn't home, the system would respond. We tested soap mixtures in the driveway, trying to find the ideal balance between frothy chaos and safety. After several failed attempts, including one batch that smelled like licorice and burned the eyes, we settled on a cinnamon-vanilla blend that was both gentle and offensively sticky. By Sunday afternoon, the system was complete. We dubbed it Operation Bubble Trap. It was stealthy, effective, and above all, satisfying. I'd turned my lawn into a brightly colored warning sign, and now I had a defense system that doubled as a justice delivery device. We ran a live trial that night. Just a 10-second spray burst across the edge of the lawn. Foam danced in the moonlight. It clung to the grass, floated into the street like little clouds of defiance, and then vanished, leaving nothing but a faint, sweet scent and a wet sidewalk. We laughed like kids who had just built a treehouse with a secret entrance. The next day, Karen returned. She didn't come empty-handed. She brought with her 2 HOA members and what looked like a packet of printed bylaws. She walked the perimeter of my lawn like a general inspecting a battlefield. I watched from behind the blinds, remote in hand, but didn't press the button. Not yet. This wasn't the moment. She took photos. She whispered to the others. She made notes on her clipboard, but she didn't step on the lawn. That's when I knew the paint had worked. It startled her. It shifted the power dynamic. But the real punch, the one that would echo in HOA meetings for years to come, was yet to be delivered. We were ready. The system was live. The lawn was pink. And Karen was still convinced she had control. But what she didn't know, what she would soon find out in the most spectacular, sudsy way possible, was that her reign was over. All it would take now was the right moment. And a little bit of soap. Inspection day started like a perfectly rehearsed performance. The sky was clear, the sun was smugly shining, and the scent of freshly cut grass from neighboring yards filled the air like nature was mocking me. I woke up early, not because I was anxious, but because I wanted to be ready. I wanted to be present for every passive-aggressive eyebrow raise and clipped comment. Today wasn't just any HOA inspection. It was Karen's inspection, and she was bringing reinforcements. At exactly 10 a.m., a silver SUV rolled into view, its tires crunching slowly over the pavement, like a royal carriage approaching a battlefield. Out stepped Karen in a tailored cream blazer and pale pink slacks, her authority outfit. Her sunglasses were big enough to block out empathy, and her smile was the kind you give when you've already decided you're right. 2 HOA board members followed, both of them holding clipboards, trying to keep up with her brisk, determined walk. I stood on my porch with my coffee, the very image of casual defiance. My lawn, still gleaming in its bold neon glory, waved softly in the breeze like it had no idea it was the main attraction. Karen's eyes flicked across it like a scanner. She said nothing at first, just scribbled something down on her clipboard, while the other two mumbled between themselves. Then she made her way to the sidewalk, directly in front of my house, heels clicking with precision. "Morning," she called up to me with that razor blade tone wrapped in taffy. "We're doing the semi-annual inspection today. I'm sure you already knew." I nodded. Hard to miss. Half the block mowed twice just to impress you. She ignored the jab. One of the board members, Phil, I think, pointed to my lawn and said, "Is this supposed to be like that?" Karen turned to him and said, "We're documenting it under non-conforming colorization. It disrupts the visual unity of the community." "Actually," I said, walking to the edge of my porch, "there's nothing in the bylaws about grass color, just maintenance. My lawn is trimmed, watered, and weed-free. The color is cosmetic." Karen stiffened. "It's an eyesore." "To some. But then again, so is your cousin's 12-foot inflatable flamingo during Easter," I said, smiling. Phil snorted before quickly looking away. Karen's lips thinned. She stepped closer to my yard, almost to the edge of the pink zone, and clicked her pen. "Regardless, we'll be issuing another violation." That's when it happened. Just as she leaned forward to snap a close-up photo, the wind shifted slightly and the motion sensor caught her. A soft click sounded from somewhere along the gutter. And then, without any warning, the sprinkler system roared to life. A wide, arcing spray of cinnamon-scented soap burst forth in a sparkling, glorious fan, soaking the lawn and dousing Karen's shoes, slacks, and clipboard in a sticky, foamy glaze. She screamed, not the kind of scream you make when startled, but the kind you make when your entire personality is under attack. Phil and the other board member leapt backward, but Karen, caught in the middle of her charge, slipped. Her heel gave way, and down she went, backward, into the wet sidewalk, her clipboard flying into the air like a frisbee no one wanted to catch. The foam kept coming in short pulses, as if it knew this was its moment to shine. Karen flailed, trying to stand up, arms coated in suds, hair catching the light like a frothy halo. From across the street, a neighbor gasped. Then another laughed. And then the floodgates opened. Laughter rippled down the block like someone had set off fireworks. Mrs. Phillips was doubled over by her hydrangeas. The Patel kids were filming from their porch. Even the mailman paused at the end of the street, phone in hand, capturing the moment. I walked down my steps slowly, remote in my pocket, trying very hard not to look smug. Karen sat in the puddle, soaked, stunned, and speechless. Finally she stood, soap dripping from her arms, and snapped, "This is sabotage." I pointed calmly to the tiny sign I had placed next to the sprinkler head. "It's a heat-triggered emergency sanitation system. activated by proximity and rising temperature. Perfectly legal, perfectly safe. Phil stepped forward and muttered, "It smells like cinnamon buns." Karen turned to him in horror. "You're not seriously letting this go?" Phil looked at her, then at me, then at the wet sidewalk, and said, "Honestly, it's the cleanest this lawn's ever looked." That was the moment I knew the tide had turned, not just on my lawn, but in the neighborhood. Karen didn't speak for a full 10 seconds after Phil's accidental mic drop, which, by her standards, was an eternity. The only sounds were the distant giggles of neighbors and the wet slosh of her foam-drenched shoes as she shifted uncomfortably in place. Her cream slacks were now a sticky shade of cinnamon beige, and her once immaculate clipboard lay soaked and warped on the sidewalk like a fallen crown. The other board member, Janice, I think, stood frozen, unsure whether to comfort Karen or pretend she had never met her. Karen finally turned toward me, her face twisted in the kind of indignation reserved for royalty being served tap water. "This is harassment," she hissed. "You've humiliated me in front of the board, the neighborhood." Before she could finish her dramatic monologue, a dark blue sedan pulled up to the curb, and out stepped Mr. Carlson, the HOA's legal advisor. His expression was unreadable behind a pair of tortoiseshell glasses, but he held a manila folder under one arm, which he tapped lightly as he approached. Karen's demeanor shifted immediately. She straightened, wiped the foam from her blazer, with the grace of someone trying to salvage both dignity and dry fabric, and greeted him like a hostess, welcoming a guest to a crime scene she hadn't caused. "Thank goodness you're here, Mr. Carlson," she said breathlessly. "This homeowner has turned his yard into a booby trap. He's endangering the neighborhood." Mr. Carlson didn't respond right away. Instead, he opened his folder, pulled out a stapled packet, and handed it to her without ceremony. "Karen, we've received several formal complaints over the past few weeks, including allegations of fabricated bylaws, misused HOA funds, and unauthorized enforcement actions issued under your name. These documents outline the findings and include copies of your unauthorized letters and photographs of your midnight lawn alterations." Karen's face drained of color. That's absurd," he continued. "You've been removed from your position as HOA president, effective immediately, pending further investigation. All board operations will be reviewed by an independent committee moving forward." The silence that followed hit harder than the foam cannon. Karen stood frozen, fingers twitching slightly at her sides. Her power, her clipboard, her reign, gone with one manila folder and a neighborhood full of witnesses. Her eyes darted toward the remaining board members, but they avoided her gaze, suddenly far more interested in the cracks in the pavement. Then came the screams. Not from Karen this time, but from her daughter, who had just arrived in a black SUV, stepping out in full bridal hair and makeup, both now half melted thanks to the humidity, and likely a very hasty glam session. She took one look at her mother, covered in soap and surrounded by people filming on their phones, and shouted, "Mom, what did you do?" Karen turned, arms wide, voice trembling. "I was trying to make it beautiful for you. This was supposed to be perfect." Her daughter, tears now mixing with mascara, stomped off toward the bridal tent that had been set up in the nearby park, muttering something about postponing the whole thing. Guests who had already arrived for the ceremony were slowly backing toward their cars, some trying not to laugh, others already dialing ride-shares. Someone loudly asked if the reception had been moved to a car wash. It was chaos, but the kind that doesn't scream or explode. It unfolded like a building collapsing in slow motion, one floor at a time. I stood by my porch, hands in my pockets, watching it all with a strange mixture of relief and surreal amusement. The woman who had policed mailbox colors, fined children for sidewalk chalk, and demanded that Christmas lights come down by January 3rd, was now soaking wet, surrounded by bubbles, stripped of her title and clout. Neighbors who once whispered their complaints in hushed tones were now openly chuckling. One guy leaned over his fence and called out, "Hey Karen, need a towel?" Another neighbor placed a foam finger prop in the grass and snapped a photo. Kids were already turning soap clumps into snowballs. Karen didn't respond. She just stood there for a moment longer, then slowly, almost mechanically, turned and walked back to her house. No speech, no threats, no clipboard, just the sound of soap squishing in her shoes. And as the last of the wedding guests trickled away, I picked up my hose, not to attack, just to rinse off the sidewalk. It felt symbolic, like washing away a chapter, one sudsy footprint at a time. The following day, something had shifted in the air, not in some dramatic, cinematic way, but subtly, like the silence that follows a thunderstorm. The pink grass still shimmered beneath the morning sun, loud and proud, but the tension that had gripped the block for years had quietly loosened. For the first time in a long time, it felt like people were breathing easier. It started with small things. Mrs. Phillips, who had lived 3 doors down for over a decade and barely made eye contact with anyone since the great rosebush pruning scandal of 2017, walked by with her dog and gave me an actual smile. Not the tight-lipped, fearful kind. A real one. Then she paused, looked at my neon lawn and said, "I always thought your grass looked fine, but this is art." A few hours later, the Patel kids showed up with sidewalk chalk and asked if they could draw on the driveway. They used to get reprimanded for that. Karen had once called a graffiti alert on a drawing of a bunny wearing sunglasses. I told them to go wild. They scribbled flowers, rocket ships, and eventually a giant pink alien in honor of the lawn. They named him Bob. Bob became something of a mascot. Even the guy who never talked, Mr. O'Hara, who mowed his yard like it was a military operation and never waved, offered a salute as he drove past. I'm not sure if it was sarcastic, but I'll take it. Around midday, someone stuck a tiny flag in the ground at the edge of my property. It wasn't an HOA notice. It was handmade. Pink cardboard taped to a stick with the words "Free Land" written in glitter marker. A neighborly joke, no doubt, and it made me laugh out loud for the first time in weeks. More neighbors stopped by, some pretending to inspect the grass, others openly curious. A woman I didn't even know brought over a plate of cookies saying, "Thanks for finally putting Karen in her place. We've been watching for years, hoping someone would stand up to her." It was like the whole neighborhood had been living in the same bad dream, and someone had finally switched off the alarm. People started talking. Really talking. Sharing stories about Karen's reign, the fines, the absurd rules, the late-night surveillance she insisted was community care. And now, with her gone and the HOA restructuring underway, it was like a collective weight had lifted. Someone painted their bushes blue. Another neighbor hung rainbow pinwheels across their front porch. One house even installed a gnome army in the front yard with signs that read, "Gnome Sweet Gnome," and "Powered by Pink Grass." What was once a rigid beige neighborhood started looking, dare I say, alive. The irony, of course, was that in trying so hard to make everything uniform and presentable, Karen had drained the soul out of the place, and it took a gallon of neon lawn dye and a well-placed sprinkler system to bring that soul roaring back. My lawn had become a symbol, not of rebellion, but of reclaiming space. Not just for me, but for everyone who had been silently irritated, quietly scolded, or politely trampled by HOA tyranny. It wasn't about pink grass anymore. It was about freedom. A week after the chaos, the neighborhood had settled into something that resembled peace. Not the artificial kind Karen always tried to orchestrate with themed garden parties and regulation bunting, but a quiet, genuine calm. The lawn was still neon pink, slightly faded from the sun and a few light rains. but it remained just as vibrant in spirit. I hadn't repainted it. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't want to. It had become more than a lawn. It was a symbol, a flag planted in defiance of forced conformity, and a bright pink reminder that boundaries matter. One morning, I stepped out with my usual cup of coffee and noticed the silence. Not an eerie, waiting for the next shoe to drop kind of silence, but the peaceful kind, where the only sounds were birds chirping and the distant hum of a lawnmower that wasn't mine. No one was patrolling the streets. No one was writing down fence paint codes or measuring grass height with a ruler. Karen was gone. Not physically. She still lived in her house 2 streets over. But her power, her presence, her ever-looming clipboard aura had vanished. I spotted her walking her dog once that week. She didn't look angry. She didn't even look defeated. She just looked small. Not in stature, but in spirit. Her gaze didn't linger on my lawn. Her dog tugged at the leash, clearly eager to get away from any spot that held recent traumatic memories involving cinnamon-scented soap. She didn't speak. I didn't wave. We just passed each other, 2 people who had once shared a war, now moving on in different directions. The HOA held a public meeting 2 days later. Not in secret. Not behind folding tables guarded by Karen's circle of yes-men. It was in the community hall, doors wide open, coffee and donuts provided by a retired couple who had always wanted to volunteer but never felt welcome before. People showed up, a lot of them, and they spoke. Nervously at first, unsure if it was really okay to question things now. But the nervousness didn't last long. Someone cracked a joke about post-traumatic sprinkler disorder, and laughter broke out. Actual laughter, in an HOA meeting. They voted to restructure the board. New faces were nominated, transparency policies were introduced, and the budget was opened up for full review. Turns out, Karen had been moving money around for years, labeling odd charges as aesthetic enforcement and holiday morale boosts. Her cousin's catering company had been listed as a landscaping consultant. It was all out in the open now. Back at home, I finally installed a small wooden plaque near the edge of the lawn. Nothing dramatic, just a clean piece of cedar with burned lettering that read, "Private property, enter with permission," or soap. It got a few chuckles from neighbors walking by. One even saluted it. Another suggested we make mini versions for every yard in the cul-de-sac. It became a local joke, the kind people shared with a grin instead of a groan. And the neighborhood? It came alive, not with noise or parties or pink grass revolutions, but with simple connection. People lingered longer on their porches. Kids drew chalk murals without fear of fines. Front yards started looking different. Not messy, but personal. Unique. Alive. Looking back, I don't regret any of it. Not the confrontation. Not the planning. Not even the moment I clicked that remote and let the soap fly. Because it wasn't about revenge. It was about drawing a line. About saying, enough. Karen had built her authority on silence and fear. And the second someone stood up and said no, loudly, brightly, and unapologetically, her whole empire crumbled. It turns out, it didn't take a committee to change the neighborhood. It just took a lawn and a little pink paint.